That I'm delighted that everybody has come to this. I think it's really important. The reason I decided to do this evening was because our school, the new school, has been an activist for freeing children from the bondages of the indoctrination camps, the education systems, and I think the two things go hand in hand, healthcare and education, and if we can free ourselves from these two major systems, then I think we become ungovernable at that point. So that's the goal here tonight, just to share some information from some of the doctors that I use that I think are just the best in Toronto. We have Lester Ponce, who is like just a dear friend, but also he's a little magician. He does biochemistry and other stuff that he's going to talk about. I can't figure what he does exactly, but he's amazing. We have Dr. Sonia Kutska, who's going to start with her her amazing story and how she's very much an MD, but an alternative MD. I'm new to her practice as a patient, but somehow your name comes up in conversation for me, like all too often, Sonia. So we're delighted to have you here. We have Dr. Tiffany Wise, who I just love. Where is she? There she is. I just love you. She's like the best. I've sent you like everybody that anybody who needs somebody, it's like go to Tiffany. Herbal medicine, naturopath. And we have Dr. Alan de Leon, and I'm super excited to hear about German New Medicine because Shelly has talked my ear off. So I'm super excited because I think it just rounds everything up. Obviously, we've established this school here in my basement. Yeah, it is the best school. Hi, Amy. Thanks for coming. Come in. It's been like, you know, the journey. I'm meeting this Italian lady here from, she's Italian English, and she's like a filmmaker. I'm like, that's all we need is a film about my life. I feel like it's already theatrical enough. In short, my story is that I got kicked out of the school system, thank God, and we just finished litigation 2 months ago, so we're waiting on the decision, and I'm sure it's going to be a good one because I do believe that, you know, victory will prevail. I have absolutely no intention of ever returning to that terrible, disgusting system. I found my entire heart here, and we're super happy to keep building this just amazing space for kids, and I know we're gonna grow, and we're gonna grow and grow and grow, and we're busting at the seams here, and I'm gonna have great news for the families that are continuing on with us very soon. I don't know if and so we need to move them to that space, and we're growing, and I'm excited. And so we have a lot of things that we do at the new school, and one of the things that we did was we curated the most beautiful art auction, and these are about half the pieces you see around me that were left over from the Refound Ed Educational Conference. And you can disregard like the prices, there's a value there or whatever, but we would love your support. All the money goes towards the school, building this, expanding this, and ultimately what I've been doing or trying to do is funnel money in to get more kids to come in on bursaries, because there's quite a few kids who do want to come, are on a wait list right now and are waiting for some kind of like a bursary program to kick in because they just can't make it for a few $100s. It's a big step for some people. This disgusting sick care system that they call a healthcare system that like I would rather literally die than have to go into. So I'm super lucky that I have Dr. Kutska. But I mean, I personally, I don't use the healthcare system. And so, you know, there's things that I think are gonna come down the pipelines, but the reality is, the healthcare system, the new healthcare system for the new world is not going to get built without the education system first. Because what's coming out of that old system is these indoctrinated, you know, they're never going to build anything. It's impossible, right? So we need to start here. This is like the breeding ground. We breed up kids that are going to create that new healthcare system, unfortunately. Unless there's a few, you know, that break away, but the ones that already have, they're already alternative, and or they're getting persecuted. Like, it's just, you can't win in the old system. It's a system that you just can't win in. Liz is here. She can tell you she's been fighting in York Catholic for quite some time now. You know, the sexualization that they're shoving down these kids' throats, the critical race theory, all of it. Like, her son got called a racist because he wouldn't share gum. Her daughter got taught in grade 9 health class at my old high school how to go on hormone blockers and what else is it? And like how to mutilate themselves. Like, it's disgusting what they're doing to these kids. And so I think it's our collective responsibility to make sure that, you know, we help this new we're gonna have a very sick generation of kids if we don't move them out. And then the next step is taking our personal responsibility for health. So I'm super excited to give the floor to these amazing people, but I wanted to start, because I got a little surprise, a boomerang. Kat, who's visiting us from the US, who's an ex-officer, and we're just gonna give her the floor. And I know you guys all know this, and everybody in this room is on this side of the line, but Kat unfortunately took vaccines for the COVID and got severely injured. So she's just gonna shed some light on her story. She's been an officer for 15 years, and she's just gonna quickly tell us a bit. And we're not gonna have a sob fest. It's gonna be good because this is like building new earth here.
I promise that part.
Yeah, come in, Kat.
Thank
you. I'll give you the floor quickly just to shed some light on what's going on, because I think it's important. We have some filmmakers here and some journalists capturing this. I think it's important for people to remember this shit is real. They're fucking killing people and they're hurting lives. So I'm gonna cry, and they're killing kids, and yeah, we gotta stand up for them. Sorry, I always cry. Okay, I'm giving you the floor. Go ahead.
I promise you I will. Hi, my name is
But we're not
Kat.
gonna do a stop.
No,
We're
God.
not. It's gonna be all good stuff here.
My name is Kat Parker. Like she said, I'm from the United States. I live in Minnesota, but I'm originally from Georgia. You can tell by the southern accent. I was a police officer for about 15 years in Georgia. I got out because it was corrupt. It was very corrupt. I look back now at what I see, what's happening now, and I can tell you there are good officers and there are bad officers. I promise you that. They're on both sides. And the good ones are fighting the bad ones. And if you go against the bad ones, they will fire you. They will blackball you. That's what happened to me because I went against someone. I became a journalist eventually. My passion was concert photography. I love concerts. You can tell I'm a rock fan. Huge rock fan, 80s rock. If you ever see me anymore, I'm usually right in the pit taking photos, but I don't get to do it very often like I used to. I took the J&J shot in April of 21. I had to for my job to keep it. And within about a month after that, I started having chronic fatigue and insomnia. Went to the doctor, my GP, and I went to a neurologist. I went to a hematologist. I've gone multiple places, and they were like, "You're just overworking yourself. You're just tired. You have an iron deficiency. It's probably normal because you're in menopause." Okay. I asked my mom, I said, "Is this menopause, is this normal? Because I don't want it." So then they're like, "No, you're fine. Just take this, you'll be okay." I just dealt with it. Asked if it could be the shot. They're like, "No, it can't be the shot. We're not having any problems anywhere with people." Okay. So I lose my job. Eventually we get laid off. About 9 of us get laid off. I work for a construction company, so I was a project manager. And so I go a couple months without a job, and then I go and get another job. I work for CompTIA Tech I run a school for a nonprofit. And so they are required to get the booster to travel. I am a single mom with 2 kids, so I really didn't have the option of not having a job. I didn't have child support coming in. I didn't have anybody to support me, so I said, okay, as a mom, I'm going to do what I need to. But I think at that time, if I would have had informed consent, I would have said, go to hell. Because 2 weeks after I took that Pfizer booster, my hair starts falling out. And then the week after that, I start having tremors. I have Parkinson's disease at 50 now. I have narcolepsy, sleep apnea, idiopathic CNS hyperinsomnia. I have Behçet's disease. I have dysautonomia. I have brain fog.
I'm so sorry.
Memory loss.
Jesus.
32 neurological conditions. 32. And they keep coming and coming, and they don't go away. Every day. And for those people that say out there, it's not the shot, can you honestly tell me with 1,000% certainty that it's not? Because I can tell you right now, it is. I have 4,100 people in a group that I created, a support group. 4,100 people, including children in there, with myocarditis, pericarditis, dementia, Behçet's, skin lesions, huge lesions. They've lost their legs. I'll get very explicit here. I have blood clots and bleeding anally every day. Every day. It never fails. Thank God I'm in menopause, because I don't know what it would have done to me the other way. But I can tell you right now, when I get up in the mornings, I fall over. I cannot communicate with anyone when I first get over. It is horrific. And we have no help. None. They have dropped us and basically told us that we're all lying. This is our own government. This is every government. This isn't just Canada, because it's shit here. Let me tell you, I talk to people who say it is shit here. It's shit in the UK. It's shit in the United States. It's shit in South America. Everywhere. These people are told, I'm sorry, we can't help you today because I don't believe you. It's all in your head. Are you telling 1 million people that are dead now and 1 billion people at 8% of the population that they're all nuts? Are you telling that mother who lost that 5-month-old that took that COVID shot a couple months ago that's dead now in the grave, that she's lying? Are you telling that to the 6-year-old that has myocarditis that never had it before, that's in my group, that keeps going in the ICU every time I turn around? Tell that to Alex over in the UK and Scotland who lost his leg. Tell that to the boxer over there in Scotland who now can't even box or lift weights because his heart beats out of his chest and he almost passes out. I can go on and tell you every person in my group and the symptoms that they have after taking those shots. And it's just not Pfizer, it's Moderna, it's J&J, it's all of them, AstraZeneca, all of them. And people say, well, I'm fine, it's okay, I'm good, I haven't had any side effects. Well, let me tell you, there's a time switch in that Pfizer one. Every mRNA shot, there's a time switch in it. I promise you, you will. I promise you. I promise you. I mean, people say, well, I don't know anyone. Well, have you asked? Have you asked anyone that you know? Have you really asked anyone? Because I can promise there's a lot of people that said they haven't even asked anyone. You have friends that you don't ever see anymore. They just disappeared. People that you know that used to be lively and happy, and all of a sudden now they're different. They're just not themselves anymore. Because I know I'm not myself anymore. I used to be happy and healthy. Part of my condition is I get this feeling in my brain where it feels like somebody took a straw in there and filled it up with foam, and then my personality changes. And then I start talking really fast, and I get anxious, and then I get aggravated and angry at anything. Somebody can walk in front of the car and I get aggravated. Somebody can talk to me, or the noise of the dogs crunching on their bones, or barking, or anything just drives me insane. And it feels like a foreign entity in my head. Is that normal? Is that normal for any vaccine? No. And do you know now that in the children's shots that the mRNA technology is in the children's regular vaccines now in the United States? They're in the flu shots too. If they're not going to get you through the COVID shots, they're going to get you some other way. Honestly, to me, it feels like genocide.
Yeah, I think it is genocide, Kat. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
This is not just about the doctors that are being targeted, but the doctors are a conduit for the state to be able to eliminate medical freedom and informed consent and privacy. Because we know the World Economic Forum agenda is that by 2030, we will have no privacy, and love it, apparently. So this is just part of that bigger agenda. And so they recognize that because human rights have developed to the point where, at least in Western constitutional democracies, people have understood that our human rights are not given to us by the state, but they exist because by nature of us being a human being, that in order to eliminate that, they need to set up a new social contract, so to speak, right? So the way human rights have evolved is that the government exists in order to protect individual human rights, and as long as the government does that, it has legitimacy to govern. And the individual agrees to relinquish certain power to the government in order for them to protect the human rights of the individual. But when the governments abdicate their responsibility for protecting individual human rights and in fact take on the role of violating individual human rights, and on top of that make human rights conditional upon obedience and compliance, that social contract is gone. And then it becomes imperative on the citizens to then hold the government accountable, to say you are no longer legitimate. You only have power to govern over us as long as you protect our individual human rights. Now that that is gone, you don't have the ability to govern us anymore, and we will assert our own individual human rights. And so in a way, what Dr. Kuzka's case has evolved into is her patients recognizing that it's actually their rights that the state is trampling upon. And they're doing it through the doctor. So it's a very technical legal argument that's being made in the courts, because we have to get into parsing the legislative provisions that, give the power to the registrar of the college to be able to initiate an investigation, and through the investigation be able to seize her records to be able to see is she a good doctor or not. And all of that exists so that generally patients can be protected against malpractice. So what's happening is that the registrar is using that framework, and that's why you heard a lot if you were in court about the statutory regime. They're using that framework to speak on behalf of the patients in a very condescending manner, to say that patients are being harmed and we are here to speak on their behalf. And so when the patients come and say to the court and say, no, we can speak on our own behalf, the court is conveniently deciding that, no, you don't have any rights vis-a-vis the regulator. It's a private matter between the regulator and the doctor. And so that's the excuse to be able to remove the public. But this public is not going away. This public is not going away. So we have set up a group called Privacy is Your Right, and Martin handed out the flyers. I would really encourage you to read it, because there's a group of very committed, highly intelligent, very organized, passionate people who have spent a lot of time to protect the privacy of all Canadians. Nobody knows about this case because there's a media blackout. And it's not because the media doesn't know about it. They do attend, and they don't report it. Even if a reporter reports it, the editor nixes it. It's because if this story gets out to the public, people will be like, what do you mean? the doctor-patient relationship is one of the most sacred relationships where I can go and divulge whatever I want, and I know that it is trustworthy, it is safe, and it is confidential. And unless I say so, I own my own information. I get to control what happens to that information. And unless I give consent, that information is not for consumption for anybody, including a regulator.
And by the way, that's what the Supreme Court has said pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And
So
that's yeah. go
yeah.
ahead.
So the position of the patients is established not only on 40 years of Supreme Court of Canada jurisprudence setting out specifically the right to privacy of health information and the right to ownership of medical records, but it's also based on, you know, over a century of human rights.
Common law,
And common law. So we have very good legal foundation for our case, but we keep being rejected by the courts not because of our arguments, but because they refuse to hear us at all. So we're not even getting our foot in the door. And this, I think, is endemic of the cancel culture that we have going on right now, where if the government doesn't like what you're saying, you will be censored and you will be canceled. The same thing is happening in the courts. The courts are not above what's happening in the rest of society. And so the judges are doing the same thing. They don't want to hear what you have to say, so they'll just cancel you out. But we're not going to be silenced. And that's why we have this organization called Privacy is Your Right. Please go on the website. Please share this information with everybody that you know, because in order to continue this legal battle, we need to be able to fund the most intelligent, highly competent lawyers. And Dr. Kuska has her own lawyer, but this is not her private legal battle. She's fighting for all of us.
How do we contribute, Amina?
So if you go to the website, there's a donate button there.
Okay.
And Ontario Court of Appeal. And we were asking for a hearing that was ordering the production of records. We're not at that phase right now with Dr. Kuska. And in the Court of Appeal, the judge said, well, you know, what's the consequence of the records being released to the college? There's no consequence for the patient. There's just, you know, because they have no reasonable expectation of privacy, which is astonishing. But the consequences are this. Once the college has that information, their legislation allows them to release that information to the police, to do a criminal investigation, to any public entity, if they think the health and safety of the public is at risk. And very, very early on in a companion case with another doctor, the College of Physician and Surgeons Lawyers actually said, we need these records because we want to know who are the unvaccinated. So this is really a
find all this out though through our health cards.
So this is
Scanning us at the
really
airport.
this is really a fishing expedition to get to the population in general that they have no legal right to through the doctor. And the legislation does allow for it. So the consequences to people for the loss of their privacy is not so, I mean, there's a lot of risks to it, right? Yeah. And so it's not just about asserting your privacy for the sake of asserting your privacy in order to protect your charter right, which is important in and of itself, but there are also consequences that you can't even contemplate that do place you at greater risk. And just to put this in perspective, in our law, we have recognized that the right to privacy against state intrusion includes things such as an individual who's been charged with a crime has a reasonable expectation of privacy on an incoming text about a drug deal. The courts have found, yes, in that situation, an accused has a right to assert privacy. In another case, the Supreme Court of Canada said that a teacher who was charged with possession of child pornography had a reasonable expectation of privacy in their computer owned by the Board of Education, they could still assert a privacy interest. So for them to say that patients cannot assert a privacy interest when a regulator is investigating the conduct of a doctor is so contradictory, so hypocritical, and outright dishonest that it brings the administration of justice into disrepute. And I think that's a bigger concern for us, is that the judiciary is no longer acting independently, but actually abdicating the responsibility for being that check and balance between the executive and the legislature. And this is a very big concern for us because that's what our democracy depends on. And that's why a lot of us are here in this country, is because we think we're living in a democracy. Right? So this case actually, you might think, oh, it's about, Dr. Kusel was losing her license to practice medicine, but it's actually about a lot more important issues. And that's why we have a media blackout, because if most people knew and could connect the dots, they would realize that this is an extreme abuse of power by the government. So please help get the word out, and please support this case. Thank you.
Vaccine Choice Canada was established in 1980, and they were viewed as an extreme lunatic group until COVID, until we started litigation on the COVID, right? In 2015, they approached me, and in 2019, they had proposed amendments to the School Pupils Act in Ontario. In 1980, they had made vaccine on the surface mandatory for children. This is before the charter was even enacted. And so they had made it mandatory, subject you could exert a medical or religious exemption. What they did in 2019, which my client saw as a precursor to something even bigger coming down, was they said, okay, you can assert an exemption by signing an affidavit that includes a statement that you recognize that by asserting an exemption on behalf of your child, you recognize that you could be causing your child grievous bodily harm or death. Well, why is that important? If your child, for whatever reason, got a reaction, which they can claim came from the absence of vaccine, you would be criminally charged with failing to provide the necessities of life and manslaughter, and you've already confessed in that affidavit. So we said, no way. So we brought the constitutional challenge in October 2019, and we let it sit there in case the government had any crazy ideas of putting this through. At the same time, New Brunswick, Dominic something or other, the health minister in New Brunswick, actually was coming down to put in mandatory vaccine for school children, and my clients went out there and petitioned, and they managed to defeat the bill by 4 votes, right? So why is this important, and where did this all start? Believe it or not, it started in 1965 with the assassination of John Kennedy, when the industrial military complex, performed that American coup d'etat, and it's been downhill from there. So I'd like for you to think about something. 1968 and 1969, swine flu, avian flu, swine flu number 2, avian flu number 2, and as we march into the 80s and 90s, SARS. This pandemic idea has been in the planning for the last 55, 60 years, and in fact goes way back. The Spanish influenza, the outbreak of the Spanish influenza came out of Army barracks in Tennessee, where they were testing a vaccine funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. So this is only 3 generations that have, my father was born in 1917, so he was alive for all of this. So you have this history, and a few years ago, we took a challenge to the Food and Drug Act. How many of you have heard of the Codex Protocol? Anybody? That is an international treaty that they've been trying to to pass that says that if you want vitamin C,
No.
no, leave it alone.
Yeah, okay, just because it might go fine.
I'm over 22.
Okay, it might go fine. I feel like you're gonna get Italian with that. Okay.
My father always used to say, it takes me one glass of wine to get drunk, usually
Still
between
put it on
number
these-
29 and
You
32.
put it on the paintings, you buy them.
Okay, so we have to fight fascism on all levels. Leave it
Okay.
alone. Anyway, so the Codex Protocol would have it, and this we're talking about 10 years ago, they had it ready for signing, that if you wanted naturopathic remedy, a vitamin C would have to come through an allopathic doctor's prescription. Okay, so I took a case to the Supreme Court of Canada with the natural food products people, right? And they changed the Food and Drug Act 12 years ago that said, if you put anything that suggests that your product improves your health in any way, you have to go through the pharmaceutical drug protocol of testing, which takes $2 to $5 million. So they're trying to wipe out naturopathic. So the irony is that in Switzerland, which is the seat of a lot of these global pharmaceutical companies, the Swiss freaked out because that's where they also have all these naturopathic and herbal remedies, right? Under the Swiss constitution, they can force a referendum for a constitutional amendment. And what the Swiss did, the people, forced the Swiss government to have a referendum ensuring access to naturopathic, herbal, and homeopathic remedies, and it passed by 74%. So the Swiss Constitution now guarantees their citizens access to those alternative remedies to pharmaceutical medicine. So what we have is this progression, and the reason that they've been so successful in this last round of the pandemic is social media. Okay, social media, they've fragmented the society. When I was growing up, 70 million people watched Walter Cronkite every night. Another 70 million watched NBC, and another 70 million watched ABC. Now, if you get a series like The Sopranos that has a viewership of 3 million, it's a huge success. It's not a drop in the bucket. It's not even a trickle of pee in the American bucket. There are 400 million people in America. The fact that 3 million people are listening to the same message is supposed to be huge. It's pathetic. We've been fragmented, splintered, and nobody's on the same page. It's hard to organize. By design, through your cell phone. Okay? So this is why it's picked up. But this has been in the planning for decades. So in 2020, when the pandemic, my clients, Vaccine Choice Canada, we filed our constitutional challenge to the School Pupils Act in October 2019. They felt something was coming around the corner. That was the exact same month where the COVID-19 pandemic was being rolled out. So in January and February, when all of this stuff about China was coming out, my client said, "Rockwell, this is it. They're going to declare a world pandemic. You better start researching to file against against COVID when they declare it as pandemic." So they hired me a week before it was actually declared. And so it took me 4 months to research it. And in July 2020, we filed a statement of claim that was 200 pages long. And they insisted, and they debated with the board whether we get into the international dimensions of this pandemic. And then we decided to plead it. And if you read that statement of claim, July 2020, it talks about the WEF. It talks about the Rockefeller Foundation report. It talks about the last 60 years of the planning of this shit, right? And of course, we're all nuts conspiracy theorists, right? And so this has been around. And people who think that, the world starts with their birth, That's North American culture and society. We just don't have a historical perspective, right? We forget about thalidomide. We forget about the fact that in the 50s, pregnant women were advised by Health Canada to smoke cigarettes for their health. On and on and on.
DDT,
DDT.
asbestos.
Muhammad Ali
Yeah,
did not have Parkinson's.
right.
He used to train outside in the woods. They used to spray him with DDT 7 times a day to keep the mosquitoes off of him. And so it was found that the DDT coated his blood cells and it interferes with the electrical transmission in his brain.
Right.
Okay? So this stuff has been around, right? And it's planned, it's executed with incredible organization and a lot of money. The only solution is to withdraw your consent to be governed.
Yes.
You're doing
Yes.
that with your children here, great, okay?
Not all of them, but I mean, yeah.
Not all.
Yeah.
But you gotta take your cell phone and put it in the fucking toilet. Your cell phone is your handcuffs. This agenda could not work if people shut off their cell phones for 2 months. Their entire system would collapse. Shut off the computer and the cell phone for 2 months and they'd be on their knees.
It's our cocaine, we can't do it, like, it's like, we're never gonna do it, right? But,
And you know?
no, I know, it's impossible though, but what we
No.
can do is say
No, it's
no.
not impossible.
I know,
Impossible.
but, like,
You know, people say,
try getting everybody on board, right?
well, no, but you get as many as you know.
Yeah, you're right, the Mennonites do it.
Yeah, the Mennonites do it. People say, well, you can't succeed in this type of world without a cell phone.
Rocco,
Yeah.
would that just be to shut down social media, or would it be to like shut down?
To not be tracked.
You're withdrawing yourself from the matrix.
Right.
And if you're not in there, number one, they can't take your money, exploit you, send propaganda to you, make you subject of their AI, okay? So people say, oh, you can't function in today's world without a cell phone or something. I always say to people, I want you to introduce you to my older brother, Luke, who was a real estate agent, then he was a lawyer, but never practiced law. He's never had a beeper. He's never had a cell phone in his life. He's retired, he's worth 4.5 million, and he did very well, thank you very much, without any of these gizmos, okay? So it's a fallacy that we need all these things.
Right.
We're saying here, handcuff me. And it's just sad, because really, if you can't give up your cell phone, and
Yeah,
you claim that
it's
you're,
not- It's a lot of other things,
Like
right?
what?
Like the medical system, like the schooling system, like you can not have a cell phone, but then you send your kids to the indoctrination camps, or you send you're
No, I know it's
you're
not there.
prescribed to like a sick care system.
I understand
So,
that. I
you know, it's
understand
a
that.
lot of things.
I understand that, but you're not captive to the government through the school system. You can opt out of that easily.
Right.
What people are not willing to do is they give the comfort of the ease of the comfort that these apparatuses.
Yeah.
You know, Stephen Hawking, who was the greatest physicist the planet Earth ever produced, right? A year before he died, said there are 2 major threats to humanity. And nobody wants to listen to him because they don't like the message. He said, the greatest threat to humanity is AI. We've got to put an end to artificial intelligence right now. And then he said the second one is alien invasion, and don't assume that the aliens are going to be friendly. We can't do much about alien invasion until they get here, or if they're here. But the artificial intelligence only works through communications.
Yeah.
It cannot work if you're not hooked in,
Yeah.
okay? It can't work with, the stuff they can put through the transmission of messages to the cell phone is mind-staggering, okay? So back to this whole, so all I want to say is that people tend to look at these battles through the blinders of a horse. This is a huge agenda that didn't start with COVID-19. This is the 9th permeation of this attempted, as the May 2010 Rockefeller report said, and it was entitled, it got leaked, How to Obtain Global Governance Through a Pandemic. That was the title of the report. And if you read that report, from 12 years ago, 13 years ago, you will read the script that we've lived through since COVID was announced, right? And we have precedents for this in history. Just imagine this, right? A lunatic gets arrested and jailed, and while in prison, he writes a book detailing how he's going to get rid of the Jews, the gypsies, the homosexuals, the cripples, and cleanse German society, and nobody listened to him.
Yeah.
And then he actually took power, and people still weren't taking him seriously, right? And I often draw analogies to what's happening now to the Nazi regime. Why? We forget. Who did Hitler parade on the front lines to convince the German people that the Jews were an inferior race, that the gypsies were an inferior race, that homosexuals were deviants, that mentally challenged children and physically challenged? Who did they parade for the first 7 years of their agenda?
Medical and science.
Doctors and science and psychiatrists. The medical professions were out there pounding this to the German population. He didn't put out his soldiers, he did, but the people who convinced the population were the medical profession. And so that's why I say, as I said on a recent podcast with Vaccine Choice Canada, that the CPSO are Nazis. They're fascists. They're fascists, and you got to resist.
Yes.
And everybody in this room should start gun training and shooting and prepare for the day where you may have to. No, seriously. Arm yourselves. Okay?
Cut.
Yeah.
I will cut that out.
No, yeah, for sure.
So,
And the wine.
But I mean, there's also, on like a very love and light note, there's a massive awakening happening. Like, people are waking up. There's a massive revival happening in the world. Like,
don't confuse an awakening with a grieving. People are grieving and regretting what they did.
Oh,
They
yeah.
don't- That's
Yeah,
not
that's
an
true.
awakening.
That's not a
Angela,
But, I mean,
that's not an awakening.
that's true.
Oh, the good news is
But through that, they'll awaken, right? I mean, we have testimony tonight.
right. The last thing I want to say is when I started representing Vaccine Choice Canada in 2015, vaccine hesitancy on vaccines was just under 2% in Canada. Because of the COVID disaster, okay, according to Teresa Tam, and I believe her, it's probably higher, it's up to 14%.
No, it's
So-
way higher.
Well, that's-
Way
that was
higher.
Higher, but even
Way higher.
that, even that. So now people are double guessing all vaccines, not just the COVID vaccine.
Oh, it's way higher
Okay,
than
so-
14%. I don't
And who
know.
else
I don't
did you
know
say,
a person
Dominic?
today
People
having a
go?
kid who's vaccinating their kid, which is like amazing, right?
They wanted to vaccinate 7 billion people a year with these COVID vaccines. So 7 billion people a year at $110 a shot, that's what it costs them, whether it's subsidized or not, amounts to $3 trillion. We cannot envisage 3 trillion, so I have to put it to you in graphic terms. $3 trillion a year is 842,000 and change for every day of the year. Since the year they crucified Christ. It's over $750,000 a day, every day of the year, for 2,000 years.
I love that because you're admitting that they did crucify Christ. And he is my Lord and Savior. And I just want to...
I trained with the best of the best in herbal medicine.
John?
His name was John Redden, so
Yeah.
I'm grateful for him every day. And so I'm here to talk about what we can do in terms of medicine and bringing medicine back into our own hands. You know, for since the Flexner report or before that, people would use herbs in their own homes. Moms knew how to take care of their children. Grandmas, looked after the family, and it was only in real emergencies that people would go to the doctor. So I'd like to, in my practice, help people just find resources within themselves and make sure that they're equipped with remedies that they can either make themselves or grow themselves or use at home so that they can look after their child should they have a fever, look after themselves should they be in distress, and even know the signs that are coming if they need to be moved out of the home. I use nutrition and herbal medicine for the most part in my practice. And so I brought a few books that we can pass around today. So this is one of my favorites at the moment. It's called...
Wine?
Is it yours?
No, is it wine?
No, it's tea.
So, my name is Lester, and Lester. So, I was thinking having a quick short speech about what I do and what the clinic does and blah blah blah, but at the end, I believe that that's quite relevant. Listening to the people that were priorly speaking, they were talking about the heart, and that brings something on my head that kind of brings something very interesting. I've been studying for a little bit about the heart a little bit, and there was a study in 1990 that they discovered what other function of the heart. Everybody thought about the heart being just a pump of blood, that the heart will just pump blood supply and it will help to oxygenate the blood and then move it on and push it to the extremities, push it to the brain, and so on and so on. And just seeing what happened with a lot of weakness on the heart and debilities and illnesses that have been showing up with the heart that different practitioners have been treating, doctors and so on. In 1990 it was discovered that the heart has a lot of epinephrine and norepinephrine receptors. Basically, it's an emotional center. There is a lot of brain chemicals that get secreted from the heart, they get released to the brain, and the brain is almost like an interpreter. You put it in words. There are these highly adaptive cells, like in the brain, everybody know about neurites. So neurites are like the neurons, but they're the neurons in the heart. They found about 40,000 different types of neurites in the heart. And these guys are constantly sending information to the brain, to different hormones. They found serotonin receptors, noradrenaline receptors, different hormonal and brain receptors in the heart. So I guess that Shakespeare was hard. He was okay. He knew what he was talking about. We don't feel anything with the brain. We feel things with the heart. We feel emotion with the heart. We express it with the heart. The brain is just something that puts things in words, so we can transmit it, we can communicate to other people. But it's one of the things that is happening, especially with all these time or hard times that we're living, is that people are getting completely detached out of the center or the heart itself, and the effect that they have on the emotional system, the effect that they have on the hormonal system, and again, it's just break that idea of trying to stay healthy within the heart itself, not just looking at the heart, as I said before, as a pump of blood, but as a major controller of our human behavior, our soul, our emotions, and our basic functions as well. And that's it. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, but what do you do? Because like you do this amazing, he does this amazing biochemistry thing that I can't describe it. All I know is that he puts all this stuff on you and like you lose control of your limbs completely, and that's how he figures out like what's wrong with you. And he puts it on your gut, I'm assuming, because everything stems from
So
that.
the work summarizes basically based on functional neurology, functional biochemistry as well. I blend different techniques from different practitioners that I met through the years. Mainly all are applied kinesiology practitioners. I follow the work of a gentleman from England that I think is an incredible biochemist. His name is Chris Astor Smith, and basically what we do is using muscle testing to identify not just why the muscle doesn't fire, because there are different stages of the muscle. The muscle can be in a facilitated stage, which is a normal stage. It can be into a hyper-facilitated state, which is firing too hard and is not letting go. It's usually what we know as a tight muscle. And it can be in an inhibitory stage, which is not firing at all. The muscle that is not firing at all, we don't feel anything. we feel usually the one that is in a hyper-facilitated, the type 1. And in a normal therapy is going after that type 1 to release it, to massage it, to rub it, to get it to relax, but what we're trying to figure it out is what is not working on the other side to restore balance or homeostasis within the muscular system. When we identify the muscle that is not firing, that is inhibited, that is not working efficiently, we try to figure it out like a network system of what would be the cause or the possible cause that muscle is not firing. It could be a problem with the tendon, it could be a problem with the ligament, it could be a skeletal problem with the spine, it could be a problem with the brain receptors. Maybe there is a brain chemical that is not firing well that is affecting that muscle function. It could be an excess of maybe something causing inflammatory reaction. It could be a toxin blocking the neurological function. It could be a chemical. It could be a toxic metal. It could be radiation sometimes. Or it could be an infection, parasite, bacteria, fungus, viruses. So there is a gamma of spectrum that we look at it. It could be as well an allergy, a sensitivity, a food that the body is reacting to. One other thing that we changed a lot in the last 2-3 years, we are not testing allergies anymore or allergens of food anymore. We test group of chemicals because we realize that the body reacts to different chemicals. For example, solanine, oxalates, caffeine,
Glyphosate.
malondialdehyde. There are different chemicals that the body reacts, and then when we find the chemical, and then we look at all the food that chemical is on, and then we are more accurate trying to narrow it down to what the body cannot process, what the body cannot break down, and so on and so on.
So yeah, as Angela mentioned, my background originally, I'm trained as a chiropractor. I've been a chiropractor for 20 years. And it was really 6 years into my practice. I expanded beyond I was originally the team chiropractor, for football teams at Villanova College. I was kind of I was into the sports chiro angle. Yeah, originally. Then I got into the whole pediatric. I got my fellowship in pediatrics, so treating pregnant women, children, and then I got into some of the energy medicine. So a lot of what Lester was talking about, I've been fortunate enough to be around some people that have been practicing in some similar manners. And then it was around 2008, 2009 that I was introduced to this whole concept of German New Medicine, or GNM. My naturopath colleague that I was working with at the time mentioned Dr. Hammer, brain scans, emotions, cancers, and disease, and that's kind of what got my attention. My background originally, before being a chiropractor, was in psychology and kinesiology. So the basic thing in German New Medicine, a lot of this research came out of in the 80s, coming out of Germany. A lot of Dr. Hammer's students that happened to speak a different language brought a lot of his teachings that were in German originally into places all over the world. And I was fortunate enough to learn it from one of his English-speaking students that happened to live in Montreal at the time. And that's kind of what introduced me to this concept. So this whole idea in German New Medicine is completely going to be in alignment with this whole concept of how we take the power back, how we get our sovereignty back, how we get this freedom from the system. Because the concept in German New Medicine, it's based on these 5 biological laws. But the first thing is this idea that you cannot have a physical symptom without some sort of unexpected, emotionally distressing situation preceding it. So this is kind of not really new, right? Like in the 30s and 40s, they already knew, like, you have a major traumatic event in your life and people get sick or get disease diagnoses. But the thing in GNM that is so unique is that what Dr. Hammer noticed was, like, for example, 5 of us here would lose a child, which is very traumatic to a parent, but he didn't understand, like, why didn't we all get the same symptoms? Like, how come it affected your colon, it affected my prostate, it affected your breast, it affected your kidneys? Like, why don't we all get the same diagnosis or disease when we have the same shock? And so what he did, which nobody does today, really, is he thought, since the brain controls every organ in the body, let's brain scan all the patients. So as I'm sure Dr. Chris can know, you can't just get a brain scan if you don't have neurological symptoms, but he brain scanned everyone. So because he did that, he started to notice these sharp target ring configurations will show up in the same area of the brain for every single person with the same symptom. So everyone with diarrhea would get the same hammer focus in a specific region of the brainstem. Every single person with vomiting will get it in a specific region of the temporal lobe. Everybody with a skin rash, it would get it in the same area of the sensory cortex. So he started to map out that that part of the brain must be a control center for that organ. And then he talked to his patients deeper. He said, you know, for example, tell me about how you actually experienced the loss of your child. And what he started to realize is that we don't all experience these unexpected conflicts, or what we call a conflict shock in GNM, the same way, right? That somebody might experience that loss as an anger, somebody else would experience it as somebody torn from my skin, somebody else would experience it as a profound loss. And so what he started to map together was, there's this relationship between our psyche, the brain, and the body that you cannot separate. So you look at each patient as this biological unit, always thinking psyche, brain, and body all the time. And so he mapped it out that when we talk about our psyche, it's actually your split-second subconscious and subjective perspective of that unexpected event that determines what part of the brain will get the impact, and therefore what physiological changes will take place in the organ controlled from that specific region of the brain. So this became known as like the first biological law, right? That every time we experience an unexpected conflict, there's a simultaneous response in the psyche, the brain, and the body that will initiate changes. And usually those changes are initiated to assist that organism in dealing with that emotionally distressing event. So this is kind of the, you know, one of the basic things to keep in mind. When we have these shocks, we enter a biological program that has two phases. The first phase is the stress phase, or the conflict active phase, and then the second phase is the healing phase. So what happens in the first phase is you have a shocking event. You get a phone call that a close friend got in a serious car accident, they may not survive. By the time you get off that phone, you're already in the first phase. You're in a shock state. So you're in a conflict active state, which is a prolonged sympathicotonic or stress state. At that moment you get off the phone, you don't know how you perceive that news. You're gonna go to the hospital, to the ER, to see if your friend's gonna survive. But at that moment, it could have been a loss conflict, it could have been a separation conflict, it could have been an anger conflict. Only if you had a brain scan at that moment, and somebody trained to read the brain scan from a GNM perspective, they would be able to determine what potential biological programs you're already running based on the brain scan. Okay, so that's what makes this kind of, I mean, it blows your mind once you really get to the fact that the brain scan is definitive in identifying this.
Does that equally apply to sociopaths and psychopaths?
Yes, yes.
Why?
Yes, so.
Why does it apply to sociopaths?
So that's a deeper level. So there's a thing in GNM called constellations. So a constellation is when you have a shock, the way you perceive it impacts the left hemisphere of the brain. If you get a second shock, that day, that week, the next year, depending on how you perceive that second shock, if it impacts the opposite brain hemisphere in a particular pattern, Dr. Hammer identified like 23 or 22 different constellations, that second impact will not create any physical changes. It will create an instant change in your mood or behavior. So that's considered a constellated state. So this is what happens when you hear about a child, like an example of that. I'm going into way more detail in this, but this is what, it's good to know. So you can have a child, for example, that has, and I just have to say this because it makes a difference. Let's say you have a right-handed male. The way they clap, it's a right-handed male, 7 years old. At 7 years old, that right-handed male could have a territorial anger conflict because the mother has a second child. And let's say the way the child perceives it is anger, because now I don't get all the attention. Again, remember, these are subconscious subjective perspectives, right? You don't know how your child's going to perceive anything that's unexpected. But if that 7-year-old perceives having a younger brother in my territory, in my home, makes me angry because he gets all the attention now. So that child could have a territorial anger conflict, which will impact the right temporal lobe, which is the control center for the small curvature of the stomach. So every now and then that child will complain of stomach pain, feel like an ulcer, feel like throwing up, okay? That's one conflict. Let's say that's not resolved, because the younger brother is not gonna go away. At 11 years old, let's say the parents are getting a divorce. If that's a second shock for that right-handed male that's now 11, if he interprets that shock as an identity conflict, I don't know where I belong. Do I stay with mommy? Do I stay with daddy? Where is my place? I have to make a decision. That's considered an identity conflict. That will impact the left temporal lobe in the control center for the lateral third of the rectum. That will cause hemorrhoids. The moment that child has that second shock, he will enter a constellated state of what's known as an aggressive constellation, which means at 11 years old, all of a sudden that child gets into fights. All of a sudden that child has outbursts. All of a sudden that child becomes a bully maybe. So the spectrum of the intensity of the aggression is based on the intensity of the experience of the shock. So if it's a milder aggression, he starts swearing more. If it's like moderate, getting into actual fights, and to the point that you could actually harm someone if it was severe. So this is why, to me, actually that's the part about GNM that blows my mind, because man, like it explains why people's behavior are the way they are. It's based on a subconscious, subjective perspective of an unexpected event. And so we know this to some degree, right? Like if you watch Behavioral Analysis Unit, all these kind of shows that talk about like what made that guy snap.
Right.
How come, well, there's an identity conflict compared to tied with a territorial anger if they're a right-handed male, because that makes a difference. So there's such specifics, but to get back to your question, that's why people start to behave the way they behave, where it's a compulsion.
No, but I'm interested in the notion of, because that would, test the theory of sociopaths, and I've read a lot of studies on sociopaths, because they're most of our politicians and CEOs. They don't have empathy for other people. So the fact that their best friend just died in a car accident, they couldn't give a shit.
Yeah.
So how is that?
So you can have, so that's another constellated state, one of the 22 or 23, known as emotional numbness. So emotional numbness is what's also known as a cerebellum constellation, which means you have two conflicts that affect the different hemispheres of the cerebellum, which are linked to, for example, multiple attack conflicts. So somebody that's attacked by their mother and then attacked by their father will create that kind of scenario. So somebody that is constantly attacked, as a defense mechanism to that constant attack, they will, when they become constellated, will become emotionally numb. So this is your typical sociopath, no remorse. So imagine when you compare a cerebellum constellation with an aggressive constellation, then you have your typical murderer, rapist that has no remorse. So again, from I can't believe I'm talking about this aspect of it, but this is the part to me that is amazing.
See, I just always say, show me the parent, I'll show you the problem. But
But you see how it's not the parent, it's how your child perceives that unexpected event.
Right.
Because you can have 3 kids, and you can say, if you don't hurry up and put your coat on, I'm going to leave you here.
Yeah.
And one child perceives that as gets scared. Oh my gosh, mommy's really going to leave us. Child number 2 might feel like abandoned. Oh my gosh, well, we can't live alone. Child number 3 thinks mom's just saying that she's never going to leave us. So child number 1, if it's a scare fright, will have a chronic bronchitis, chronic cough, or an asthma. Child number 2, if it's an abandonment, will have water retention and will have unexplained weight gain. Child number 3 will get no symptoms. So this is why when it comes to parenting, I talk a lot about adaptive parenting. Because when you learn about GNM, you start to adapt to your child's vulnerabilities and sensitivities. So if you know that child number 1 gets scared when you say that, you don't communicate that with child number 1, right? You cater to based on their symptom. So that's the difference here. We can't assume every child is going to have an anger conflict because they get angry, they're going to get stomach aches. Not necessarily, because they could interpret that as a lack of support. They'll get back pain. They can interpret that as a fear. They'll get a cough. So again, in GNM, the symptoms determine the person's subconscious perspective of an unexpected event. Okay, so that's important to note. But the thing that I was saying is this idea of two phases, right? Because when you're in the stress phase, and we've all felt this before, there's an impact already in the brain, changes are already initiated in the organ, but 70 to 80% of the time you don't feel any of those organ changes. Okay, so the only thing you feel in that first phase, when you are stressed, blood vessels constrict, so you have cold hands and cold feet. You can't get that conflict out of your mind, so you're waking up at 2 in the morning, you can't go back to bed, and you don't have much of an appetite. You're not hungry, you forget to eat. You eat a little bit and you're full. Because the body's saying, listen, you're in a stress state right now, we don't want to be in this state for long. You don't have time to eat or sleep. You got to resolve this issue. So that's what would happen if you get that phone call, your friend's in the hospital. If in your mind, I cannot relax until my friend is discharged and back home, if that takes 5 days, in those first 5 days, you're in a conflict active state.
No,